It starts in the quiet moments, the ones no one remembers but you. You're a child sitting at the edge of a living room, watching the people you love walk right past you as if your presence was just another shadow on the wall. You speak, but your words dissolve before they ever reach anyone's ears. You smiled, but no one looks long enough to notice. And slowly, you learn something heartbreaking. That being invisible hurts far more than being disliked. Because at least being disliked means someone saw you. There is a particular kind of pain that rarely has a name. It doesn't leave bruises on the skin. It doesn't create the kind of stories people gather around or gasp at. It's quieter than that, softer, almost. The pain of growing up feeling invisible is a wound that hides in plain sight. It's the kind that looks like strength on the outside, but feels like abandonment on the inside. And if you've lived it, you know exactly what that means. To grow up invisible is not simply to be ignored. It's to exist without reflection. To move through your childhood without anyone holding up a mirror to say, I see you, I hear you, I know you. Children don't just need food or shelter. They need emotional presence. They need attunement, the kind of gaze that tells them they are real and valued. When that gaze never comes, something essential goes missing. Not just connection, but identity. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional neglect, but even that phrase feels too small. Because what you lived wasn't just neglect. It was a quiet erasure, a slow fading of your voice, your needs, your emotions. You learned early that you had to adapt by shrinking, by observing, by becoming useful instead of expressive. You learned to read the room instead of being part of it. You learned to disappear so others could breathe. And that's where this story begins. When children grow up feeling unseen, they often carry an invisible weight well into adulthood. A constant sense of having to prove themselves, a need to earn space rather than simply occupy it, a whispering belief that something must be wrong with them because why else did no one truly notice? But here's the truth that you were never told. You didn't go invisible because you lacked value. You went invisible because the people around you lacked awareness, capacity, or emotional maturity. Maybe the adults in your life were overwhelmed. Maybe they were distracted by their own wounds. Maybe they didn't know how to offer emotional presence because no one ever offered it to them. Or maybe they were so consumed by chaos, stress, or conflict that your needs became background noise to their own storms. And slowly, without choosing it, without understanding it, you learned to slip into the background. You learned to survive by fading. You learned to exist in the spaces between other people's lives. But the heartbreaking part is this. You carried that survival strategy into adulthood, and now you struggle to believe that your voice matters. You second-guess your desires, your decisions, your worth. You become the listener, the healer, the observer. You'll know everyone else so well, but hardly anyone truly knows you. This video is not just about explaining that feeling. It's about giving language to the kind of childhood that steals your reflection. It's about finally being seen, maybe for the first time. And more importantly, it's about learning how to reclaim your visibility, your voice, and your place in the world. Because you deserve that. You always have. It usually begins long before you understand anything about psychology, long before you have the language for emotions or the ability to articulate what you needed. It begins in the subtle, everyday moments of childhood, the ones that seemed ordinary at the time, but years later, you look back and realize, that's where the fracture happened. Picture this. A child tugging gently at a parent's sleeve, wanting to share something small, a drawing, a thought, a question. But the parent is too distracted, too tired, too consumed by their own world to notice. And so the child retreats, not in anger, but in quiet resignation. They tell themselves, maybe later, but later never comes. Or imagine a household where chaos is the main language, arguments erupting behind thin walls, tension vibrating through the floor, adults drowning in their own storms. In that kind of environment, a child quickly learns an unspoken rule. Don't add to the burden. Don't be too loud, too needy, too emotional. Don't take up space. Don't ask for comfort. Become small, become quiet, become invisible. Sometimes it begins even earlier, before memory itself. Babies look into their caregiver's eyes, searching for reflection, for attunement, for that spark of recognition that says, you exist, you matter. But when a caregiver is emotionally absent, depressed, overwhelmed, or simply disconnected, that spark never comes. And the baby learns something profound. The world does not mirror them back. As the child grows, the signs of invisibility become clearer, though still subtle. A sibling gets all the attention because they're louder, needier, or more troubled. A parent praises achievement but never acknowledges emotions. Another adult dismisses feelings with phrases like, "You're fine," or "Don't be dramatic," or "Stop being sensitive." And each comment chips away at the child's sense of being seen. Slowly, the child learns to stay quiet during family conversations because no one asks their opinion. They get used to people interrupting them, talking over them, forgetting the things they share. They become the one who blends into the background of group photos, the one who stays quiet at the dinner table, the one who stops expecting anyone to notice when they're hurting. The most painful part is that it never happens all at once. It's a gradual dimming, a slow unraveling of the belief that you deserve attention, care, or emotional presence. Children are intuitive. They adapt quickly, so when they sense that their needs aren't welcomed or prioritized, they shift. They mold themselves into whatever causes the least disruption. They become observers instead of participants, listeners instead of expressors, givers instead of receivers. And somewhere in that transformation, something sacred gets buried, the belief that their inner world matters. One of the cruelest truths about growing up invisible is this: no one ever tells you that you're fading. No one says, "Hey, I haven't been paying attention to you." No one apologizes for overlooking your feelings. The world around you treats your invisibility as a natural state, and because of that, you start to treat it as natural too. Your childhood becomes a series of moments where you swallow your words, silence your needs, and convince yourself that being unnoticed is safer than being disappointed. You start to believe that if you make yourself small enough, quiet enough, easy enough, maybe then you'll be loved, maybe then you'll matter. But invisibility has a cost, and that cost is the slow erosion of your sense of self. By the time you're a teenager, you don't just feel invisible, you believe you are. You sit in classrooms hoping no one calls your name. You move through hallways unnoticed. You join conversations only when you're sure you won't be a burden. You learn to laugh at jokes you don't find funny and nod in agreement even when you disagree. Not because you're shy, but because somewhere deep inside, you've learned that your presence doesn't change anything. When you finally reach adulthood, you don't even need the world to silence you anymore. You silence yourself automatically. You dismiss your own feelings before anyone else can. You downplay your accomplishments. You assume people will forget you. You don't expect anyone to ask how you're doing, not really. Not in a way that actually sees you. This is how invisible children grow up, in the quiet spaces between what they needed and what they received. In the hollow silence where attunement should have lived. In the emotional shadows of people who never learned how to look at them clearly. But here's the truth, you were never told. You didn't fade because you were unworthy. You faded because no one taught you how to shine. When someone grows up feeling invisible, the signs don't show up as dramatic outbursts or obvious wounds. They reveal themselves in quiet patterns, the kind you don't notice until someone finally gives them a name. And maybe as you listen, you'll recognize pieces of yourself, pieces you've carried for so long that they feel like personality traits, when in reality, they're survival strategies. One of the first signs is your instinct to scan the room before you speak. You don't do it consciously. It's automatic, like a built-in radar system you can't switch off. You check the emotional temperature of everyone around you, as if you're the household's emotional thermostat, always adjusting, always managing, always making sure your presence doesn't disrupt anything. It's the habit of someone who learned early that speaking at the wrong moment meant being ignored, or worse, being dismissed. Another sign is the softness of your voice. Not just the literal softness, but the way you phrase everything like a question. The way you apologize before you even state your needs. The way you use disclaimers like, "I might be wrong, but," or "This probably doesn't matter." But you speak as if you're anticipating being overlooked, as if you're preparing yourself for the possibility that your words won't land. Then there's the strange, almost aching ability to be everyone's safe space. People come to you with their secrets, their heartbreak, their disappointments. They tell you things they don't tell anyone else, and you listen so deeply, so empty, that they walk away feeling lighter. But you walk away feeling hollow, because no one ever asks how you're doing with that same tenderness. You're the healer, the confidant, the emotional container. But who holds you? Maybe you've noticed the way you bond with people, quietly, intensely, without letting them see how much you care. You're the kind of person who remembers every detail about others, their favorite foods, their fears, the way their voice sounds when they're lying. You pay attention because deep down, you've always hoped someone would finally pay that kind of attention to you. But when they don't, you tell yourself it's fine. You're used to it. Another sign is your skillful invisibility. You can walk into a crowded room and disappear without effort. You know how to soften your footsteps, silence your needs, reduce your presence until you feel like background noise. And the most painful part, you sometimes do it even with the people you love, not because you want to hide, but because you're afraid that existing too loudly will push them away. You might also notice the way you struggle to accept kindness. When someone compliments you, you brush it off. When someone offers help, you decline. When someone shows interest, you become suspicious or overwhelmed. Because deep down, you learn that attention is temporary, conditional, or simply not meant for you. So you push it away before it has the chance to disappear on its own. Another subtle sign is the constant voice of self-gaslighting inside your mind. You downplay your emotions, telling yourself you're overreacting. You convince yourself that your needs are unreasonable, that your sadness is dramatic, that your loneliness is your fault. You learned to invalidate yourself because nobody else validated you first. So now, you do their job for them. You might also feel a strange sense of detachment from your own dreams. When you imagine your future, it feels blurry, distant, like it belongs to someone else. Invisible children grow up without mirrors, so they struggle to see themselves clearly. You've spent so much time shaping yourself around other people's needs that when you finally look inward, it feels like staring into fog. Then there's the way you over-explain everything. You'll justify your feelings. You'll defend your existence. You'll craft perfect messages so no one misinterprets you. You'll replay conversations in your mind, analyzing every tone and pause. Not because you crave perfection, because you fear being misunderstood, dismissed, or unseen all over again. And finally, there is the silent grief you carry. The grief of a child who waited for recognition that never came. You rarely talk about it, but it lives inside you like a shadow. It shows up in the quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts, when someone forgets to text back, when you feel like an afterthought in someone's life. It's the familiar sting of invisibility echoing through your adult world. These signs don't mean you're broken. They mean you adapted. You survived by disappearing. You learned to protect yourself in the only ways you could. But the truth is, you were never meant to live your life unseen. And the moment you recognize these signs, you take the first step towards something powerful, reclaiming the visibility you were denied. Even though the experience of growing up invisible feels emotional and poetic, psychology has studied this phenomenon for decades. What you lived through isn't being dramatic or overly sensitive. It has clear emotional, neurological, and attachment-based roots. And once you understand them, everything begins to make sense. Psychologists often describe childhood invisibility as a form of emotional neglect, one of the most misunderstood and unrecognized types of childhood trauma. It doesn't involve shouting or violence. It's the trauma of absence, the wound created not by what happened, but by what never happened. The brain, especially a developing one, responds to emotional absence just as intensely as it responds to emotional harm. Research in developmental psychology, including work published in the Journal of Personality, shows that children develop their sense of self through mirroring. When a caregiver reflects a child's emotions, smiles back, comforts them, responds to their cues, the child's brain builds neural pathways associated with worthiness, identity, and emotional safety. But when that mirroring is missing, the brain doesn't get the feedback it needs. Instead, it adapts in defensive ways. This is where concepts like hypervigilance come in. Studies from places like the University of California, Berkeley have shown that children who grow up in environments where they feel emotionally unseen develop heightened sensitivity to subtle cue-stone shifts, micro-expressions, energy changes in a room. Their nervous system becomes trained to monitor rather than express, to observe rather than participate, to anticipate rather than receive. Neurologically, the brain wires itself toward protection instead of connection. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow self, the parts of us we suppress because we believe they want to be accepted. Invisible children grow massive shadows, not because they're hiding darkness, but because they're hiding their light, their joy, their anger, their needs, their desires, all pushed into the shadows because no one created a safe space for them. Attachment theory also explains a lot of what you've experienced. When caregivers don't respond consistently or emotionally, children often develop anxious or avoidant attachment styles. Anxious individuals fear being forgotten or abandoned. Avoidant individuals convince themselves they don't need anyone. And sometimes, invisible children develop a mixture of both deep longing for connection paired with a profound fear of being seen. There's also something called internal locus of control, which refers to the belief that you have influence over your life. But when you grow up unseen, you often develop an external locus of control. You assume things happen to you, not because of you. You wait for others to choose you, notice you, validate you. Your sense of agency was never nurtured, so it never fully formed. Neuroscientists also talk about mirror neurons, which activate when we observe others' emotions. Invisible children rely heavily on these neurons because observation becomes their primary survival tool. You learned to predict moods, adjust your behavior, and disappear into the margins. It wasn't a personality trait, it was neurobiological conditioning. And then there's compassion fatigue. You absorb other people's emotions so icily that your nervous system becomes overloaded. You're tired, not because you're weak, but because your brain has been operating on high alert since childhood. All of this research leads to one very clear truth. You didn't imagine your invisibility. Your brain registered it. Your nervous system adapted to it. Your personality formed around it. This wasn't your fault. It was your environment. And now that you understand the science, we can finally talk about the darker reality, the part most people never acknowledge. Here's the part no one warns you about. When you grow up feeling invisible, the real damage doesn't happen in childhood. The real damage happens years later, when you're finally old enough to want connection, but too wounded to believe you deserve it. Because invisibility doesn't just stay tucked away in your past. It follows you. It grows with you. It shapes your adult world in ways you don't even realize. One of the darkest truths is this. You learn to disappear even when people are trying to see you. Someone asks how you're doing, and you answer with something safe, something shallow, something that won't take up emotional space. You shrink your truth into tiny fragments, because you've been trained to believe that your full emotional experience is too much. You downplay your struggles. You minimize your successes. You silence the parts of you that ache for attention because attention feels unfamiliar, almost dangerous. And when someone finally does look at you with real care, real interest, real presence, you don't know how to receive it. You pull back, you change the subject, you laugh it off, because being seen feels like standing under bright lights after living your whole life in shadows. Another hidden reality is the way invisibility makes you gravitate toward people who recreate that same childhood wound. You choose partners who don't listen, friends who forget you, workplaces where your efforts go unnoticed, not because you want to be invisible, but because invisibility feels like home. Your nervous system seeks what it knows, even if what it knows is neglect. There's also the quiet loneliness, one of the heaviest consequences. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't truly see you. You sit across from someone you care about, smiling, nodding, being supportive. And inside you're wondering if they would even notice if you stopped trying, if you vanished emotionally, if you faded the way you once did as a child. And then comes the guilt. Invisible children grow into adults who feel guilty for needing anything at all. You apologize before asking for help. You feel like a burden when you're upset. You struggle to set boundaries because you learned early that your needs were optional or even inconvenient. And when you finally break down, when the invisible weight becomes too heavy to carry, you feel ashamed for not being strong enough. But here's the darkest truth of all. You learn to overlook yourself the same way you were overlooked. You stop checking in with your feelings. You stop honoring your instincts. You stop noticing when you're hurting. You become so skilled at blending into the background that you begin to fade inside your own life. You forget who you are, not because you lack identity, but because no one helped you discover it. People see you as calm, reliable, low maintenance. They don't see the exhaustion. They don't see the buried child inside you who spent years whispering, "Do you see me yet?" They don't see the nights you replay old conversations, wondering what you did wrong. They don't see the comfort you find in silence, not because it brings peace, but because it brings familiarity. And perhaps the most painful hidden reality is this. You have spent so long observing life from the sidelines that you don't know how to step into center stage. You watch others chase opportunities, express emotions, demand to be heard, and you envy them, not because they're better, but because they were taught something you weren't. That visibility is a right, not a privilege. Growing up invisible doesn't just steal your childhood, It steals your confidence, your voice, your sense of belonging, your belief that you matter. But here's the part no one ever told you. The invisibility you learned was a survival strategy, not a destiny. You weren't born to disappear. You were conditioned to, and conditioning can be unlearned. Shadows can be stepped out of. Voices can return. Visibility can be reclaimed. And that's where we go next. Healing from a childhood of invisibility isn't about becoming loud, dramatic, or suddenly fearless. It's about learning, slowly and gently, to take up the space you were always meant to inhabit. It's about remembering that you were never meant to live in the margins of your own life. And the very first step is this: you must learn to notice yourself. For years, you've been trained to tune into everyone else's emotions, scanning them like weather patterns. But now, you turn that awareness inward. You pause and ask, what am I feeling right now? It might feel strange at first, almost unnatural, but that's because you're beginning to rebuild the attunement you never received. You're learning to offer yourself the emotional presence you were denied. The second step is something tender, something brave. Let yourself take up emotional space. Maybe it starts with saying what you really think, instead of what's easiest. Maybe it's being honest when someone asks, "Are you okay?" Maybe it's allowing yourself to cry without apologizing for it. You begin reclaiming visibility in small, deliberate ways, gentle acts of self-expression that remind your nervous system, I am allowed to exist fully. Shadow work becomes a powerful tool here. Carl Jung believed that everything we suppress becomes part of our shadow. For invisible children, the shadow is full of abandoned truth, anger you never expressed, joy you never showed, dreams you never voiced. Healing means bringing those hidden parts into the light, not with judgment but with compassion. You learn to say, this part of me deserves to be seen too. Another step is learning to set boundaries, which might be the most powerful act of visibility. Boundaries say, I matter. My needs matter. My time, my energy, my heart, these things have weight. At first, it feels rebellious, almost wrong, because your childhood conditioned you to be endlessly accommodating. But with each boundary you set, you reclaim another inch of yourself. And then there's the step that feels both terrifying and liberating, letting others see you, not the polished version of you, not the endlessly supportive version. You let people see your fears, your hopes, your imperfections. You allow closeness. You permit connection. You take the risk of being visible, knowing visibility comes with vulnerability, but also with belonging. Healing also means rewriting your inner narrative. The story you carried for so long, I don't matter, I'm forgettable, my voice isn't important, was never your story. It was a reflection of people who couldn't see you, not a reflection of your worth. Now, you begin crafting a new narrative. I am allowed to be here. My presence has value. My emotions are real. I exist, and that is enough. Finally, you learn one of the most profound truths of all. Visibility begins with self-recognition. The moment you see yourself clearly, your strength, your gentleness, your resilience, the world starts seeing you differently too. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped shrinking. You stopped apologizing. You stopped disappearing. You began returning to yourself. And slowly, beautifully, you learn that you don't have to earn visibility. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to disappear to be loved. You were never meant to live unseen. And now, you don't have to anymore. Let me tell you something. You never had a childhood where your presence was fully acknowledged. You never had a mirror held up to your feelings, your hopes, or your little victories. And for years, that absence shaped who you believed you were. But here's the most important truth. Your past does not define your future. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to speak your mind. You are allowed to cry, to laugh, to express joy, to express anger, to feel deeply, to exist fully. The child who once whispered in the corners, the one who learned to fade, they're still inside you, waiting to be heard, waiting to be held, waiting to finally be seen. You don't have to do this all at once. Healing is not a race. It's a gentle unfolding. Step by step, word by word, breath by breath, you reclaim your visibility. You learn that being noticed is not a privilege, it is your birthright. So when you feel invisible, remember this: your voice matters, your needs matter, your presence matters. The world may not have shown you that before, but you can show it to yourself. You can honor your inner child. You can nurture your shadow. You can shine in ways you never thought possible. You never had a childhood, but you still have a future. And this time, you get to write it. This time, you get to live fully in the light, fully in yourself, fully seen.